Welcome back to another Guns Contractors video. In this video I want to go through a simple task really. A lot of people who watch my channel are existing plant operators will know this, but they're getting a lot of people who are maybe newer to plant or are hobby users, have bought a machine for a small holding, a farm, and are looking for a bit of advice on maintenance and the best way to look after your excavator. So, greasing. It's a very, very cheap way of keeping the spanners off your digger. Nothing cheaper than grease, although it's getting more expensive like everything. But if you grease your machine, you can make those pins, those bushes, quite common things that you replace on an older second-hand machine, you can make them last 3 times, 5 times longer if you have your greasing schedule right. Types of grease, do you know what? I really don't think it matters. Any grease is better than no grease. And I run the JCB Blue stuff. I got a decent deal on it years ago, and then I was given another box by somebody retiring. So it's just what I've had, what I've run. But I wouldn't have a problem putting any type of grease really in these machines. Now people are going to hate me here. They'll say, well, you know, there's definitely grease you shouldn't be putting in it. Any type of lithium complex stuff is going to be good enough. Even the cheap stuff you can buy in places like eBay and other wholesalers is going to be better than no grease. As long as it's not a graphite type or a graphene actually is good, but an abrasive. There are some greases that are abrasive, but you know what I mean. Any sort of lubrication is better than no lubrication. Now, the other question is, how often do you grease? And to be honest, it's how long is a piece of string. Again, it's very subjective. Some people grease their machine every single day. Some people go once a week. Some people don't bother at all, obviously. But personally, I find machines for me, they don't do a set thing every day. Some days they might only do 20 minutes work. Another day they'll do 12 hours work. I tend to run it by the fuel tank. If I fill my machine up, full tank, I generally run around it quickly with the grease gun. And if you do that, you don't tend to use a lot of grease because you've already got joints that are full. You're only topping up what's there. You're not looking to spew it out the sides and have it all running down the arm. That's wasted grease. Grease running down the side outside the joint is not grease in the joint doing a job. So I'm going to show you my little tips that I find for making greasing a little bit easier, because it is a mucky job, but it's definitely key to ensuring a longer life out of your machine. Even a knackered machine still deserves grease, because, well, you're not going to knacker it anymore, are you, by putting some grease in it? So I'll show you my little tips that I have for greasing up and how I go about it. So I think it goes without saying that every rotational point on a machine, and there's lots of them, if you think anything that moves has a grease point, needs greasing. Now sometimes these things have a remote little one that will come down the arm, so you don't, if you can't reach it, you can get it. There's actually some here, for example, that are buried in the back of the machine, so there's nipples. Basically, if there's a nipple there, grease it. That'll get to the ram for the offset and various other things. But pretty much everything that moves has a grease port on it somewhere. Often they're on the end of the ram. Manufacturers do try and make them a bit more accessible, although some do a better job than others. My favourite type are these pin end greasing, because I mean, if they're all on one side of the machine, you can literally just run down the machine and do that. And JCB were doing that at one point, but they seem to have come away from that idea. I guess those pins are probably a bit more expensive, but anyway, so this one, we've got one under here. Anyway, the key with all of this is to working in a system. So it's up to you. I tend to start around the cab and I'll work my way then down the end of the arm. Sometimes it needs a couple of machine positions to do it, and you'll learn your excavator and what you can do. I know, for example, on my 8026, I can put it in one position. I know I can get every single grease port in that particular position. But some are different than others. Bigger machines are obviously harder because they're harder to reach ones. So these grease points, when you find them, and you have to sometimes search around, so you've got one on the end of the pin there, there's one here, a little bit awkward to get to. I tend to run a flexi hose on my grease gun, and there's a reason for that. I did used to run a fixed steel pipe on the end, because you could press harder into it and make sure the little fitting on the end, you know, met with the grease nipple. But I've since changed to these little G coupler device, which has just been it's literally revolutionised my greasing experience, to be honest. I won't bore you all day with how great greasing is, but that little device clamps onto the end of the nipple and has just completely changed it. So I've been able to run a flexible hose, which is great for getting in these little joints like tight ones up here. Yeah, completely changed things. Right, I'll go through how you can tell when you need to stop greasing. So hopefully you'll be able to get this. I connect my little thingy on the end, and then all I'm looking to do is pump grease until you'll feel a resistance in the grease gun, and probably hear a slight like crackling as the grease starts to come out, and that's all it needs. This one's quite tough. Right, there are the noises. You may not have picked that up on camera, but a grease point that's quite tough to get grease into generally means it hasn't been greased for a while, or is exceptionally tight. Probably in this instance on this machine with only 70 hours on it, it's probably because it's new rather than it being yeah, old grease that's in there. If you do get old grease in your joints, it's not too bad, it's not too late for you. There are things you can do to solve that. So if you get hard grease and you'll find that I can't get grease into these ports, well, that G coupler thing helps with that a bit, because it clamps really hard on the end of the nipple, and that really helps to get grease in. It doesn't like let it pass, you know, kind of around the outside of the nipple. If your grease gun's doing that, you need a new end on it really, because you're not getting any grease in the nipple itself. But it could be because you've got hard grease in there from previous people not greasing it. You can try taking the nipple out and pouring like a little bit of petrol or thinners or something, which will help to dissolve the grease that's in there. Try digging it out with a tiny little screwdriver or a little point or something. Scribe, you know, you can get in there and try and dig a bit out, and sometimes you can get it with the grease gun and you'll work a bit of grease into a joint, move it, work it in. But this is this is only when you're inheriting a machine that hasn't been done. If you grease your machine relatively regularly, you won't have that issue. Your grease points generally are pretty well protected these days, and you should really, you know, it's a 2-minute job. If I wasn't filming this video, I'd have done it long before now. So simple things on greasing really. To recap really, I do it every time I fill up with fuel. I tend to just run around and stick. Sometimes it's even half a pump and you'll feel that joint's full. The ones on the bucket links tend to use a bit more, because I guess it's rotating a lot more. But some of these joints, you know, this ram here, if you think that it does a lot of rotating at that end, but here it's probably only moving like this. You know, it doesn't need a huge amount of grease from time to time. So you'll go around, each one you'll feel needs a bit more or less than the other, depending on what it is. Stop when you hear the cracking or you can see grease starting to come out around the sides of the pin. All you're doing is wasting grease beyond that point. Any grease is better than no grease, really, in my opinion, and that's really all there is to it. Once you get your machine up to a standard, you can keep it there quite easily, and it's a very, very cheap way keeping the spanners off it. We've all seen horrendous pictures of pins worn. It can damage the ends of the dipper, you know, wear out not just the bushes but the actual nose of the dipper. You need to line bore it. This is all avoidable from just greasing regularly. You know, some of the guys in quarry applications and when they're working in the sea and water and things, they have auto grease, you know, lube things on their machine, and that'll sort of pump a little bit of grease in maybe every couple of hours or so, just to keep those joints full of grease, because they're such a hard wearing application. But for you and me on general work, I think the fuel tank rule works. It worked well for me. My last machine with 3,500 hours on it was still pretty well. It was very tight really for a machine of its age. no new pins, no new bushes, just a bit of grease. So it's cheap, really. Yeah, you replace with that tipping link, you'll spend 600 quid, 800 quid probably for a tipping link like this. Yeah, you could wear that out in a couple of 100 hours if you don't grease it. You know, I know this is a JCB and it's got apparently the special graphene bushes and things, and they do. I've seen them, but I still like to put a bit of grease. And this video doesn't just apply to this machine; it applies to every machine, and they haven't all got the graphene impregnated bushes. So you could wear that out in a couple of 100 hours, and you know, 800-900 quid to get the play out of that if you've had to buy all new components, and you may even have worn some of it beyond repair that you'll never get back. So grease is cheap in the long term, isn't it? You know, just a couple of quid a tube maybe. The JCB stuff I now is about 4 quid a tube. It's gone up quite a lot, but I haven't bought some for a while because run little diggers, they don't need a lot of grease really. You don't need to go over pumping. Feel free to get your fancy Milwaukee or Makita or whoever else, DeWalt, you know, battery grease guns. I'm sure it looks great on Instagram. It's a strong look, boys, with all these battery grease guns. But to be honest, I don't know. The standard grease gun. This is the standard grease gun that came with my 8026 in 2014, and it has been modified with this G coupler end on it. It's worked for me, and I haven't had to spend, what is it, 200-300 quid on one of them battery grease guns, charge batteries up. And to be honest, very easy to over grease with one of them, because they just, you know, they're clacking away, pumping grease in, and you can't hear if the joint's full, you can't feel if the joint's full. So for me, I'm a standard grease gun guy. They work. Any grease gun works, as long as you've got a decent end on it. That's the key. You've just got to get the grease in. So that's all my thoughts on greasing. Hopefully that's helped you out a bit. You got some ideas to maybe improve your machine with. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks.